you very much, Lehman. Well, we'll go straight into questions. I'm sure that you've got lots of questions as a panel.
Our concern will be if people don't tell us there could be 30 other people who have gone through that same situation. Therefore, none of our resources, no investments put in to solve a problem was there because we didn't know the problem was there. Yeah, I know the police aren't going to get it right every time. Do we take it seriously? Yeah, we would look at it, we would investigate it because. But then, I think the main thing is if we don't pick up patterns and we do target repeat victims, repeat offenders to actually try and put more investment in around prevention, support, what other agencies can be involved. And that's why I think you mentioned at the start here about that partnership approach and how many different people need to be involved because the police aren't going to solve the problem. We're just part of it, part of the trying to solve it, but there's so many other agencies and the people themselves that can do it.
And I take issue with what Chino was saying a little bit because, like, you're saying it's just a job for the police, and like that's the problem with hate crime, that it assumes that it's just the police who respond, and a lot of great hate crime work using that specific label is done within schools, within hospitals, within the local authority, by public transport operators. They use that term, hate crime, in order to try and tackle things in partnership with criminal justice agencies. So I don't think it is just a criminal justice issue. I think it's much broader than that.
I think I'll respond to that one in a minute. I'll
Yeah,
just sort of come back to
yeah.
one point that Bonnie raised, and that's about the normalisation of offensive behaviour. And I think that's a really fascinating point because 20 or 30 years ago, what was normal offensive behaviour, normal sexist behaviour, was challenged. And was challenged quite vehemently by communities actually fighting for the right not to be abused in that way. Communities of women, communities of different racial communities, communities of faith. Something happened over the last 20 or 30 years where those campaigns, those fights for the right to be treated with respect and dignity became not so much marginalised, but denigrated in their own right. So when we stand up for the right not to be abused, we're told, you would say that, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
And that itself seems to have pushed us back into the margins. So we may have equal rights to work, equal rights to receive services, but with that we have to put up with the other person, the bigot's right to be bigoted. So I don't know that it has become normalised, but I think that what was fought against has now gone into the margins, and maybe there is the beginnings of a need to fight again and to start to say we're not putting up with that anymore. And that, I think, is part of why I think it's not appropriate to deal with it as hate crime, because it's about societal culture. And you're quite right, other agencies are involved in working with the police as partners in dealing with these things. Those other organisations, the schools, the public transport agencies, they actually have a legal responsibility under the Equality Act to be dealing with these things. And whether we call them hate crimes or promotion of good relations or the prevention of harassment, it is that organisation's legal duty to be doing those things.
Yeah, to be dealing with discrimination and equality.
No, not discrimination, harassment.
Well, yeah, but when harassment leads, I think we're talking at cross purposes a little bit. But anyway,
Okay.
we'll come back.
I'd like to know the opinion of the panel about whether the blatant, to what extent the blatant display of a Nazi swastika represents a hate crime.
If you perceive it as a hate crime, it is a hate crime to be recorded by the police, so it's on perception. So depending on what obviously the circumstances are, if it's in a Second World War museum, it's going to be completely different to being as part of the EDL march and we'd have to deal with. But if it was perceived as a hate crime, it would be dealt with as a hate crime.
Somebody with a large Nazi swastika tattooed on them in a gym.
Very good question. Well, I would say that's somebody who's going to be demonstrating a certain probably thought process how that's got there. I think without actually looking at it to find out why the individual's got it and how we deal with that, I think that's really difficult for us to deal with because a lot of people's personal choices is to have tattoos, and therefore it's obviously most people here would really think that it's wrong. So, but how we actually deal with that I think would be really difficult. that'd be somebody who come onto my desk and say, is it a crime, is it an incident? It wouldn't be a crime, it would be a hate incident, because there's no crime from doing that. So, yeah, so it'd be a hate incident and it'd be recorded as so, but
we all have differences across society, we all have different thoughts, we have different feelings, we often challenge one another, which is all very healthy, but it's when that crosses over into illegal activity, whether it's abusing someone physically or inciting others to abuse, that's when it becomes an issue. When two sets of football fans meet up and they have a disagreement, you know, all well and good, but when one of the groups starts stabbing the other, that's when it becomes an issue. So the chap in the gym with the swastika on his arm, it could be the crest of a football club. That's their own personal belief, which they believe in strongly. But it's when that, or if it crosses over into something that's illegal and not accepted, that's when it becomes an issue.
Sorry,
We want to hear from you.
Just very briefly to allow the other question, I think it depends a little bit on context. So I think we all have, like I said earlier, we all have prejudices, but you need to act out that prejudice. I don't think it's a hate crime to have unpalatable views or to do something that most of us wouldn't agree with. That isn't a hate crime. I think you need to act out that prejudice. So if you're displaying a swastika in order to deliberately provoke someone, to intimidate someone, to harass someone, then possibly you could go down the hate crime route. But if you happen to have a tattoo because it's your fundamental belief, I think once we start criminalising beliefs, then we're going down a bit of a difficult path. So in most contexts, no. I'd say.
The Race Equality Centre doesn't deal with hate crime.
Oh, that's
We-
nice. Oh,
no,
oh, sorry, I thought you
no.
finished.
But what we would do is look to see whether or not that expression has the purpose or effect of violating someone's dignity or creating a hostile, offensive, degrading or inhumane environment for someone. If the person wearing the swastika, knowing that they could be causing discomfort for somebody else, refuses to cover up the swastika, then we're moving towards another realm. And it's no longer just their expression or their self-declaration.
Claire,
I'd like to go back to education and highlight 3 sets of resources that are available for teachers and for youth workers and community groups. They are teaching resources that look at identity, at values. We have anti-racist education materials. They are Global Education Leicestershire in Southfields Library, Forest Lodge Teacher Education Centre, and also Library Services for Education in the county. Though all of those sets of resources are in grave danger from the funding cuts. Some of them don't even have a person attached to them, so that if somebody had to wander into the building, they'd find them, but they're very unlikely to do that. They need to have people attached to them who can actually help people use these resources and put them out into schools. So I'd like to ask, whose job is it to invest in collections like that and, you know, help for teachers to help the children that they work with?
I think that again reinforces the point I was trying to make about the miseducation or the failure to educate people appropriately is both an act of deliberate action as well as the result of failure to act. So the failure to act in our education authorities in providing the appropriate resources to be able to educate people appropriately is the education authorities' responsibilities, or would have been. In terms of the resources at Forest Lodge, I know them well. I've worked closely with people who have worked there in the past. And it is, in my opinion, and this is my opinion, not the opinion of the Race Equality Centre, it's a crime that the librarian within the Multicultural Resource Centre was removed 3 or 4 years ago, or even longer. It is a crime that the only multicultural advisory teacher in the country was allowed to retire and not replaced. and the resource that those two individuals provided to schools across the city have just been allowed to decay, effectively. People don't have access to the facilities that they require in order to simply teach the children who are here. But I mean, all of that saying comes to say that the Education Authority has a responsibility, but then when we begin to look at schools being directly funded, the Education Authority not having the resources themselves, then it's beginning to look at the schools as education authorities, and are they going to accept the responsibility to educate for diverse communities? But even that, we need to remember schools are just one form of the education that young people have. And so the resources that are there, one of the things that authorities can do is make sure that those resources aren't just compartmentalised within that one location. And that's something about promoting, using, getting it out into the communities where people can educate themselves.
I think also education, as important as it is to educate our youth, we also have to accept the challenges that exist out there. Mainly that there's many schools in this country, in many cities, towns and villages, where the makeup of the students is from one background, and that's not through a choice of keeping a school to a certain faith, whatever. It's just the nature of demographics. And what we have to accept, and it is a challenge, is there are children growing up in this country and who have grown up, who have had no interactions with people other than their own background, and that's a challenge for us, for us to recognise that sometimes we'll have those people coming into places to work, and they won't have had those interactions, and it's easy to criticise, but sometimes it's important for us to look at the underlying causes and try and figure out a way of what we can do in those situations.
Can I just come back on that point?
Yeah.
One of the pieces of work that we've done is with the School Linking Network, where they deliberately link schools that have very different demographic makeup. It's a very simple thing to do, and it can be really powerful.
And that's when I'm talking about let's look at solutions. That's a fantastic solution right there. Something we should definitely look to promote.
Yes.
Just wanted to pick on a point that Lumen made in his final presentation, one that I agree with very strongly, is the use of the media, not only national but also I would like to use a local example, one closer to home. Over the past few weeks we all heard the story about the incident at the restaurant on East Park Road. If you read the story, the way in which that story was reported was that a Sikh vigilante group, Sikh mob, attacked a Muslim-owned restaurant. They committed a crime, there's no escaping that fact. They attacked people at that restaurant. The fact that they were Sikh was inconsequential, and the fact that the restaurant was owned by Muslim was also completely irrelevant to the actual story. Why it was felt the need to report in that way, we're not entirely sure. We then took this up with the Leicester Mercury because we were quite keen for it not to be seen as a Sikh Muslim issue, which it never was. The Mercury then reported that the day before that, Superintendent Nixon had been on the radio the day before and had announced that it was a Sikh attack. So I think there's an issue of responsibility on both the police and the local media. And then we saw two days there was a plea for calm in the Leicester Mercury from community leaders, so it didn't descend into a religious issue that it never was to begin with. But the fact that it was reported in such a way gave people the impression that there was something more to the story that was along the religious lines. So I would be quite keen to hear your thoughts on why it was reported in that particular way, when that was very inconsequential to actually happen there.
I think from the police and those incidents you're talking about have been very difficult for us to manage, trying to make sure that we don't cause sort of unnecessary upset problems within different communities. The police have reflected on what we've done then. We've met with a number of different community groups, and that feedback's been given directly to Mr Nixon as well, as to myself, because I've been doing a number of those talks with different groups. So yes, we will reflect on it. The only thing we'll say is the context of it, nothing was unfactual about what was said, it was factual. And also the fact that there was other groups that were there going to say that actually you knew who was involved. People are being described in sort of as in the Asian community, when actually it wasn't the wider Asian community, there was different parts of the Asian community involved. And I don't think we got it right, and we've apologised for that. But other groups were obviously also into the police saying, actually, please don't talk to us all as an Asian group, but actually we're all very diverse, there's different groups within that communities, especially around there. So yeah, we didn't get it right, and the media have then gone through, and then there's been loads of issues around both cases about reporting, then there's been rumours within the communities that aren't true. Then the reporting restrictions have gone on. They had nothing to do with the police, but the police take the brunt for a lot of these things. That was raised by the courts and the defence, not us. We deliberately stayed neutral on any of those issues. So yeah, we reflect that while it wasn't very good,
I think the point that it was factual, that those people who went to the restaurant were Sikh, but the fact that it was Sikh was not the reason for the actual attack. And so I think that distinction still needs to be very much made. If we take the incident that happened a few days ago, when there was young youths that were seen rioting and breaking cars, I don't believe they were down as being Christian youths or Jewish youths or anything along those lines. So again, it may be factually correct, but I question the relevance. And I just think you're perpetuating a story that is not the story, and it just wasn't helpful, to be honest.
Yeah, I completely agree, because what you've just said is right. We didn't want to perpetuate anything. There was other stories that were going on within the local communities, loads of massive concerns around child sexual exploitation. You know, child exploitation, there's a national thing from the Children's Commissioners going on at the moment. It happens in all groups, all different perpetrators, different vulnerabilities. So I think yourself, somebody on the panel touched on what the media report, it is specific, and I'll say it specifically reported on Muslim males being perpetrators. Actually, that's not true. It's not what's been seen across the country. Is this the first case that we've had? Since April, I think there's been 51 child sexual exploitation risk assessments done by the police. We've got a dedicated team set up because we've seen what's happened in Rochdale, we've seen what's happened in Wales, and a number of other places across the country. In May last year, we set up a dedicated team to look at it. Even though we've had no reports, we've proactively looked for it. And the recent cases, I don't believe, are a faith issue. There's criminality involved here, and it's crime. And I think the police have reflected, and we'll take some learning from this. Also, getting some people from independently to come in and actually have a look, see what can we learn for the future. The safeguarding boards are looking at, and the safeguarding board is the board of the local authority, police, probation, local NHS partnerships, health are all involved, and they're really trying to make sure that we engage around child exploitation, because one of the biggest groups we've missed is religious and faith groups, and there's been a load of work going on in the background, but we haven't engaged the right people. And so I think, over the forthcoming months, I hope to see a lot more how we report it, how it's dealt with, so people in the community understand that. So that's what we're trying to improve. But yeah, really good point.
Thank you. Marcus.
I thank the panel for pointing out that we each one has personal responsibility. I'm speaking as a clinician, I'm not speaking on behalf of NHS, but as a clinician, as a chairperson for mental health. I echo what two ladies have said about the violence to women. Isn't it time we also have a responsibility as males, as each individual? I'm going to say it as not as a clinician, just as a male. We need to acknowledge that this is happening in extended families, in our communities. And when a male turns around and says to the partner, I like the back of my sole, of my feet, or my shoes, what kind of term is that? What inequality is that? But isn't it about time? I am one of the leaders of a minority within minority group. It's about time we individually as males and the leaders in the community, whether it's BME community, in some communities happening more about violence to women in very form. And I created in my work, and medics, my colleagues laugh with me, and it's a sad, it's not laughable, it's a serious matter. A mother-in-law, daughter-in-law syndrome. There's a syndrome of this created in our society. What are we going to harbor this kind of behavior? It's about time we educate our communities and admit behind the scenes within our communities happening, and what are we going to do about it?
Thank you, Marcus. No, in the back.
I've had some really good points from the panel, and two of the best for me were the need to start tackling behaviours at an early stage before the behaviours actually become reinforced. And again, the point about stereotyping in the media, and as a trans woman, and a gay woman, that I feel that point very, very keenly. But I just wondered if we could look at the situation for one moment at the aspects of crimes based on sexual orientation and gender identity. 2 years ago this month, it was reported that in the London Borough of Tower Hamlets, stickers bearing the slogan "Gay-Free Zone" started appearing. As leader of the local community forum in Tower Hamlets at that time, it fell to me and my co-chair to manage community tensions. And we had a huge problem in trying to explain to the police and subsequently to the Crown Prosecution Service the tensions that those stickers, which actually carried as well text from the Quran, playing on community tensions. It actually took we had some difficulty explaining the fears and the apprehensions that those stickers actually conveyed to members of the community, and the fear of exclusion from spaces. And I know, David, you obliquely referred to it, and Neil, you said you didn't want to go there. But there is, within our hate crime framework, I suppose, a very clear hierarchy in which certain types of offences are seen as more serious than other types of offences. In a study published last year into mental health issues amongst trans people, it was revealed that over 80% of trans people had considered taking their own life at one stage, but 34% had tried it, and 17% had tried it more than once. The constant and pervasive drip of abuse that trans people actually experience is not a small factor in those statistics. So, I mean, the point I'm trying to get across here really is this: we have this hierarchy within our hate crime framework, but who's to say that verbal abuse of me as a trans woman is less serious a crime than verbal abuse of somebody on grounds of faith or race? I don't feel it that way. It's important to me at that time. I mean, our framework, to actually suggest that some types of crime are more privileged than others, surely can't be right in this day and age.
That's a very good question.
Yeah, can I come back to that? I think you're very right in that there is a hierarchy. I said I wasn't going to go there.
Sorry, no, you did.
No, but I'll do it as briefly as I can. I can talk to you afterwards about it. I think, yeah, there's a hierarchy in the sense that there's uneven laws at the moment, but the Law Commission are currently reviewing the laws to seek to put disability, sexual orientation and gender identity. So hopefully the laws will even out in the sense that that hierarchy that exists within the different strands will level out. But I think what you're saying is it's a much broader point. There's a hierarchical set of values that exist within society. It's not just a legal issue, it's not even just a policing issue. I think that you do a straw poll across different sections of society and you will find that some forms of prejudice, whether it's race or religiously motivated, might be seen as more important, more significant than transphobic abuse and harassment. And I find that totally unpalatable and unacceptable. Prejudice is prejudice. I hate it. And so I don't think it's just a question of getting the laws right. I think it's a question of transforming, and it's going as far as that, transforming the cultural attitudes and the prejudices that exist across different communities. That is a massive challenge. Already, as part of the research project, we're getting a lot of transphobic attitudes from victims of hate crime who are experiencing victimisation in other contexts, and yet they think it's okay to say things that are totally prejudicial against other communities. So there are fault lines and tensions across the board, and it's a really long-term, difficult issue that you've raised, I think.
I think I'd just reassure that from a policing perspective, hate crime has got the same policy, whether it be a race hate crime, a gender hate crime, an age hate crime. So therefore, the response should be the same, the supervision should be the same, the level of investigation investment should be the same. But as I've said, the under-reporting, and we know that people probably don't have confidence to come to the police, and it's making sure that we deal with that. And I also think there's some learning for us as police officers, because probably having engaged with people from that community very often, probably might not know how to deal with them properly, sensitively. So therefore we have to go and have to have those partnerships for people to advise us, to help us, to perform in that community, from the prison, from the LGBT building, that can actually help us. So we've got a long way to go on those
To be
areas.
fair, David, I'm part of that loop, and I have to say that the treatment I've received from your colleagues in Kingston has been absolutely outstanding. I don't have any issues there, though perhaps not as many incidents are being flagged having been reported as hate crimes, based on my own knowledge of the number of incidents that I've reported.
Yeah.
I think the flagging system really needs to be looked at again as well.
We've got time for about 3 more questions, as long as they're not too long. And I'm quite sure that the panel will hang around with us refreshments and talk informally once we've finished. Yes, sir.
Okay. I work with very much a marginalised community, which is the community of asylum seekers, through an organisation called City Sanctuary. And my concern is, we talked a little bit earlier about the normalisation of certain sorts of hate crime. I'm concerned with what I would describe as the institutionalisation of hate crime against this particular group. Institutionalisation in the sense that the media are seldom challenged. There is nobody to challenge apart from organisations like my own. The media are seldom challenged when they blazon things about asylum seekers committing crimes, particularly when you actually find, when you go further into the story, that person is not an asylum seeker, they're an immigrant, but they're not an asylum seeker. There is very little challenge of the abuse of asylum seekers within the asylum system through the UK Border Agency. I was at a meeting last night when I heard the case of somebody who was having their substantive interview with an interpreter, and they were describing sexual torture, and the interpreter laughed and was not challenged. So my concern is, how do we deal with institutionalised hate crime within government and within the media?
Absolutely, we could be here all night on this one. I think there's double marginalisation. You're marginalised on the basis of your own visible differences when you're an asylum seeker or a refugee, but you're marginalised doubly by a system which sees you as undeserving, as bottom of the ladder. And you have less political clout, you have no economic clout. So when we're talking about hierarchies of victims, asylum seekers, refugees, yeah, absolutely, and it's sickening. So taking that on and trying to address institutionalised hate crime and legitimised, I think is the term that I argue for that, is an enormous task.
But it needs to be done.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Thank you. There's a lady back there and an AJ. I'm afraid that's going to be it. Yes?
I think as well as actually educating children, we also need to address the sort of views of the middle classes, if I can use middle classes. I don't know how else to describe them, but if we wait for the kids to grow up, it's another 20 years till they're sort of my age. But there's a lot of issues now that need challenging. I'm not sure how we go about changing that amount of the population. I work in Market Harborough, and every day I come across people saying negative things about travellers, and it's just part of the course. And if I was to report everything as a hate incident, I'd never leave the station. But it's just endemic. It's an attitude that that's okay, and the same attitude exists because it's a relatively wealthy white community. There are a lot of people who, you know, moan about asylum seekers and immigrants and coming here and taking our jobs, blah, 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 blah. And how, I just don't know how we, it just seems people with intelligence don't even think about what's coming out of their mouths, and I don't know how we challenge that, because they're not listening to what you say.
So true.
Yes, AJ.
Hi, thanks, Tony. I would like to know the opinion of panel about hidden hate incident within specific community. Like it could be on the basis of caste, it could be basis of interfaith marriage, it could be on the basis of within same community subgroup. Because like faith groups, they are so diverse, so it could be basis of somebody is following different group or different faith, within same faith, different school. And there are around 50,000 of people here, 30,000 who are not able to speak English. I'm not sure how to deal with if they are victim of hate crimes, how to report this. And illegal immigrants, their perception about police is very different. So they have culture of silence, like asylum seeker, refugee. We don't have any mechanism, they don't have any mechanism to report the incident or confident to report this incident. Thanks.
Yeah, sorry, I'll be brief, then I'll hand over. We're finding it really hard for that very reason. People don't want to share their experiences because they might have a legal status, and they're just scared of authority. Just from the perspective of the research project, we're desperate to speak to people in that position. Everything's totally confidential. The survey's translated into stacks of different languages, and we can facilitate translated interviews as well. So unless we capture and document those experiences, we can't get them on the radar and get any acknowledgement for those kinds of issues. So yeah, just from a personal point of perspective, I'd love to
You're
speak to
very
you.
welcome to come along to the meetings of the Thursday afternoons.
We'd welcome that.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
You could
David,
just
would you like to
come.
comment
Just
on the
thank
point
you.
that AJ made about people who don't speak English?
Not speaking English, I don't think a massive issue, because if you come to a police officer, this radio will access their language lines, so we can speak to any language straight away on the radio. So actually those sort of issues, if somebody came to us, I think the bigger issue, and also if they went to the local authority, there'd be opportunities to find somebody who speaks a different language. The police officers that we have nowadays, there's numerous with different languages. Actually our biggest issues around some of the new communities, some of the Polish languages, Romanian. We do have police officers that can speak those languages, but they're obviously only quite short in number. So some of our recruitment and things has got to overcome those issues. I think the other big issue is around the healing communities, and obviously if someone's here illegally, that's going to put the police in a really difficult position, because it could be obviously an offence that we've got to, if it comes up they're illegal in the UKBA, have got them as a wanted file and like that, they're going to be arrested. However, what I would say is that there's ways to support those different victims through different communities and then through third parties to ensure that the report's being made through and the incident's recorded, so we can actually do something about it, even though we don't have a victim. And a lot of times, if somebody reports something to the police, we don't check if the victim is, what their background is, because we're dealing with them as a victim. So actually, that doesn't occur very often. So if somebody did come to us, then would we actually know in reality if somebody is here illegally or not with the right post, etc.? We
You
probably
would check for that.
Well, we might do if the officer thought it would, but we don't. We have 52,000 crimes. There's no way we check everybody to see what they've done and what they did. And actually, we take a report of a crime. Whether that's from a good example is there's some really persistent criminals that we'll be arresting every other week, but then they report crime to us. So we still take the crime report, but we don't check what they're up to at that time. So it's a difficult position, that is.
Very final question, as long as it's a short one.
I think I'll skip the question because I've got two questions which are, I'm a member of a community centre where we had, I don't know if the incident you remember, where we had a banner burnt and it was reported in the media, etc., etc. Anyway, but I think my question will be long and it won't be, I think, valid at the moment to ask. Maybe I'll approach one of the individuals.
Okay, okay,
but
fine.
can I just suggest that? Sorry, no, I did because of the time, because of you strain the time. But I think, can I suggest that if the group, the hate and crime group, if they can produce a poster or something which they can put in faiths, churches, hospitals, mosques, gurdwaras, temples, so at least people know where to contact. Because sometimes you've got an incident, but you don't know who to approach. If there is something where easy access for people to obviously forward, the incidents at the time, because, for example, if something did happen within my community, it would be time before I'll be able to approach you people or to report that. So if it's possible, awareness maybe is a bit something that we might need, so that obviously these things might be personally reported by individually. I mean, I'm sorry, I'm going back now. I had an incident. My own vehicle was stolen. I reported to the police. After reporting it, the chap who took the vehicle, the sergeant of the police at the time said that it was taken in good faith. Long story, cut it in short, nothing happened to him. I had to fight myself to try and take that vehicle back off him. I had to go to the police complaint bureau to try and recover that vehicle. At the end, the perpetrator got away scot-free. Nothing happened to him. Everything was washed under the carpet. When I made the complaint, I had an officer come to me and explain to me that, look, we are sorry what happened, but we will recoup your vehicle back, but keep it under the carpet. I mean, that to me is a sad incident, but this type of things do happen. If a person doesn't have the ability to go to the higher authority, make that complaint, then certain things do get washed up under the carpet. I thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. I think this is an appropriate time to wind up the formal proceedings. As I've said, there are refreshments available, and the panel will be available to carry on the discussions, which have been very lively. Can I only on behalf thank all four members of the panel for their excellent presentations and also the way that they've answered the questions. And thank you all very much for coming. Just before I finish, Ambrose wanted me to mention something about Refugee Week.